Hey fellow tennis nerds, welcome to another tennis nerd video. This time I wanted to talk about 8 very common mistakes that club players and players pretty much of all levels do around their tennis racket setups. So typical issues that I've encountered over and over in my consultations with players. It's something I see on the club circuit when you're traveling, when you're playing locally here in Malta. I see it all the time. And I just wanted to talk about them and give my thoughts about how to approach them perhaps in a better way. If you have other typical mistakes you've seen you want to share, please do so in the comments below and I'll deal with them in a future video. Always read the comments, not always have time to reply, but I will then respond to them in a future video. Please click like, share and subscribe this video. Help the channel grow. It helps me focus more and create more videos, and I appreciate all of you. Just wanted to say that. So the first typical example of a mistake is you're playing with old strings. I see a lot of players playing with a string setup for, a year, 2 years, whatever, 6 months. And I'm talking mainly here about polyester strings, meaning these kind of colorful, sometimes not colorful, but the stiffer strings, plastic feeling strings, not synthetic gut, multi-filament or natural gut, because those strings usually break after some time. But these strings, they don't break, which makes it easy then to have them in the string bed over a long period of time. But what happens is, the problem with that is that the strings go dead. Polyester strings, they lose their elasticity, they stop moving and snapping back into place, they become dead, and that's when you can develop issues with your arm. So be a bit careful about not changing strings. Even if polyester strings are extremely durable, they can stay in your racket for years and years, and you can play with them fine, but you're not getting the benefits of polyester strings, that movement and then snapping back into place, giving that elastic feel, giving you extra spin. That's not going to happen as much when you're using older polyester strings. So after around 20-30 hours, you should definitely restring your racket if you're using polyester strings. If you're using a gut string, you can play it until it breaks, or until you're feeling that you lose control because the strings are moving too much. That goes also for multi-filament or synthetic gut. But gut holds tension better, so that you can probably keep around in your racket until it snaps, which is a big benefit. Then you have a natural reason to change your string. So don't use the same string setup in your racket for too long. It might end up punishing your arm. You're not going to get the benefit from the string, the natural top spin and control you get from polyester strings. So be a bit careful. That's the mistake number 1 and very important. Mistake number 2, playing with a too demanding setup. This is also something I see all the time in my consultations. Players that use a very heavy racket with a small head size, very demanding frame made for pros. They're using it and they want to play with a pro racket, but then their game is not molded well for this racket, or their footwork is not there, and it's just becoming a hindrance then for them. And I've done this myself over the years, played with way too demanding rackets for my game and my level and my footwork, because I found it hard to control a kind of tweener style frame that gives me easy power, depth and spin. I find it hard because I was hitting the ball flatter, maybe using the arm a lot more, and I didn't have a natural topspin technique. But I think it's definitely better, as I said in my recommendations towards beginners and lower level intermediate players, please watch that if you can, that you should use a forgiving racket that has a big sweet spot, some good power. You will get easier depth, you will have more fun with longer rallies. You just need to work on that topspin generation to make sure you're hitting with enough spin to keep getting the ball into play. With this kind of bigger head size, more forgiving racket, you can also get free power, so you don't have to swing as hard. Some of these heavy old school frames, you need to swing really fast, or they are super heavy, which means you're gonna miss hit. With the small head size, you might end up getting arm issues that way. So be a bit careful around using very demanding frames, very heavy rackets. One example is older radicals, older 95 square inch rackets. They feel great, but they're very difficult to generate power with. I really like playing with this racket, but I'm not gonna play even close to my best tennis unless I'm having the day of my life kind of thing. If you care about improving your tennis, getting more depth, getting more spin, getting more consistency, I think these types of rackets are fun to use, but they're not gonna raise your level of play so much. Same with demanding frames, like heavy frames like this Pro Staff RF97 Autograph custom paint job. Great stick if you're a very advanced player, but for lower level players, I think it's gonna be too demanding. I've used this from time to time, but I always end up feeling either some stiffness because it's quite a stiff frame, or feeling some shoulder problems because it's quite a heavy frame, or just feeling like I can't, effectively swing it for the duration of a full match. Maybe a set works fine, but then when you get into a match with longer rallies, this frame is gonna punish you in the end. So my recommendation is to use a frame that's suitable to your level. More about that in content to come, and more about that also on Tennis Nerd. Find a racket that works for you and your level. That's my main recommendation. There's so many rackets out there. I'm sure you can find a racket that is perfect for your game style right now, and that's what you should play with. Mistake number 3, using a racket that you've seen a pro use, and this is also very, very common. You see players with the Pure Aero and RPM Blast thick gauge string. Strung at usually 55 pounds or 25 kilos. Why do they have this string setup? Because they've seen Rafa Nadal use it, and a lot of sites report that this is Rafa Nadal's setup. This is actually not true. If you've been following this channel, you know that Rafa uses an old Aero Pro Drive original mold. They then paint the racket to look like the latest edition, because no pro of their right mind would change their racket over and over and over again every 2 years when a new model comes out. So he's using the racket he's always used. He's using the string setup that works for his game. And my guess is that you're not Rafa, unless you're Rafa and you're listening to this right now, and then say big thanks Rafa for watching. I actually met Rafa twice, played doubles with Tony Nadal. Really cool moments in my Tennis Nerd life. He's a super nice guy, very humble, just 2 thumbs up for Rafa. But I cannot play with the racket he uses because it's a very heavy racket. He adds lots of weight to it. It's quite stiff, no issue for him. He hits the ball in the center of the string bed, has a super physique, great footwork. So what he's using is not what you should use. And that same goes for other pros. I get countless messages from Novak fans like, what is Novak actually using? The answer is on this channel. Just search for Djokovic's racket. He's using a racket you can't buy in the stores. It's quite demanding to use, heavy swing weight. And it's not for anyone pretty much but Novak Djokovic. It's a nice playing racket, but it's very, very demanding to use. And I've used Novak's racket and it wasn't easy at all. You can see it on this channel in one of my videos. So don't look too much at the pros or your favorite players, what they play. They play with something completely different from what is advertised. That's 99% the case. And they're also using very demanding, heavy rackets that won't benefit your game at all. So try to stay away from that. Find your game, your racket, your string, what works for you. That is the thing. There's so much out there. You can do it. And if you don't know how to do it, I'm going to create lots more content about this. There's also plenty of resources on tennisnerd.net, and in the future you will have a lot more advice there. So make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're not sure of how to find your ideal spec and your ideal racket and string. Number 4, using a stiff string in a stiff racket. This is related to what I said before. Players coming with the Rafa Nadal Pure Aero, full bed of RPM Blast, a stiff and control-oriented polyester string, 1.30 gauge. The thicker the gauge, the stiffer it gets. You have a really firm string bed. If you're hitting the ball a little bit off center, which we all do from time to time, you're gonna end up getting a lot of vibrations down to your arm. You might end up having tennis elbow, wrist issues, shoulder pain. There are all these kinds of injuries that can come from playing with a too stiff of a setup. So a stiff racket and a stiff string with a high tension is a combination that might lead to disaster for your arm health, unless you're Rafa Nadal or any other pro. I'm not saying everyone suffers from this issue. I'm not saying all club level players should avoid it, but it's a very common mistake, and I get a lot of this. I'm using this setup. Why do I have elbow issues? And that's why. Avoid a stiff string in a stiff racket at high tension. That's my main recommendation, and it's gonna save you some pain in the end. Number 5, using the factory string. So you go and buy a racket. The racket comes with one string. It's what I call the factory string. It could be a demo racket you try that comes with a demo string. Don't judge a racket by its string, because you need to find the string that you like, that works for this racket, that works for your game, and so on. That's why when you're buying a racket, generally any kind of decent level quality racket, it's rarely strung. Some brands, they send them usually strung. Head has a pretty decent string in most of their rackets, which is Head Lynx, actually playable string, which I think is good that they actually sell their rackets strung so you can start playing straight away. Sometimes they're not strung, but in many cases they are actually strung. So Head Lynx is a fine string, but many brands, they have a pretty shitty string, if any string, in the racket. So if you're just playing with that one and you're feeling, oh, this racket is not good, it might be that it's time to change the string. It might be that the string is of poor quality. The strings are more than half of the racket, in my opinion. You need to have a good string to really get the maximum out of the racket. And when the string is gone, the racket will be gone too. So then you need to replace the string. It's not that expensive. You can learn to string yourself even. And then you have like a brand new feeling, much better control, much better feel from the racket. So don't just buy a racket and use the string that it comes with. And when you demo, keep that in mind, that the string in the demo racket might be old, might be overused, might be cheap, might be bad, might be anything else. Then it might be a good idea to restring the racket if you have time, so you can properly test this racket. One of the issues with demos is that you sometimes get a good racket and then it's made less good by the string that is in the racket. So you always need to take the string into your thinking about your feeling around the demo and about the racket and so on. Number 6, I talked about this in my previous video, don't buy a cheap racket. Cheap rackets are of poor quality. You're gonna end up sacrificing some of your playing ability. You're not gonna get the max out of your game. Even if you're a beginner, it's nice to start with a decent quality racket. I understand that there are many people with budgets out there, but now you can get a good racket in great condition, second hand. You can get a racket from eBay or all these other sites that is in great condition and at a lower price. You can also go for models that are now being replaced by a newer edition of a racket, a newer generation. Those rackets usually go on sale and then you can get a real find. So keep looking at the sales section if you were kind of on a budget, or look online for used rackets, and I'm sure you will find something that's of high quality, well suited to beginners. But you don't need to go and get these kind of aluminium frames or these very cheap frames with bad quality, no name brands, and you're going to end up hurting your tennis and not developing as fast as you could with a better quality racket. Believe me, the racket makes a difference. Another thing I see is people that don't replace their grips. They come in with, when I string for some players, I sometimes get these really old grips where it's rotting and it's just like dead grip. This is a base grip that's all gone. Even if I touch it, it starts coming apart. It's time to replace this grip. Replacement grips are pretty cheap. They're like $6-7 or euros, and it's not a big deal to replace it. But this one is gonna be hard on the hand. The dampening is gone, the comfort feeling is gone. It should be replaced. The same thing with overgrips. I get rackets that I need to string with really disgusting overgrips that's been on the racket a long time. They have no real grip left. They look black and dirty from all the dirt and sweat and stuff. So buy new overgrips. They're really cheap. It's worth doing it. Your racket's gonna feel like brand new. I get that reaction from a lot of players that are not so keen on racket nerdism or knowledgeable about rackets. I put a new overgrip on the racket when I string it, and then they go, wow, it's completely different feeling. It feels like a new racket. It's a nice little touch that makes a difference. So don't overlook it. Replace your base grip or overgrip depending on what you use. I can really recommend that. Number 8, the last of the mistakes I've seen. I'm gonna make more of these videos if you find these useful, and I'm keen to hear your feedback. Please put them in the comments below. I'm gonna read through that and make some more content around that, reply to your questions and so on in future videos. But one of the things I've done myself and I see players do over and over again is to use too much lead tape on the racket. And what does lead tape do? It adds weight. So players are slapping a lot of weight on the racket because they want more stability, but the thing is, you're adding a lot of weight that makes the racket very difficult to maneuver. And although it plows through the ball, in a good way. You might feel like the stability and the plow through are amazing with all this weight. It's gonna impact your ability to swing the racket properly and be able to move the racket and get the racket in place for whatever shot you need to do. Hitting with topspin is going to be more difficult, and that's a very important part of getting consistency in your game. Being able to hit with topspin over and over again, get a consistent shot, is very, very important for all levels of players. It's going to make you have more fun on the tennis court because you're going to play longer rallies. You're going to move more, work a bit harder on the tennis court, get more exercise, but you're also going to have more fun because hitting more balls will be more fun. So don't slap too much lead tape on a racket. I've done that, as I've said. Some rackets are super light. They might need lead tape. They might be made to require some extra lead tape. It's all up to you in the end, but I see many players using tons and tons of weight on the racket when it's not going to really improve the way they hit the ball. I'm actually playing better with lighter rackets these days because I've improved as a player, and I hit the sweet spot more cleanly, and I can generate more topspin and racket head speed, which makes it easier for me to take a 290 gram racket unstrung and actually go out and play a set against a good player. Before I wanted to slap lead on a 95 screens racket, make it really, really heavy, and obviously I couldn't swing it as fast. I mistimed the ball, and the ball shot off really flat, so it wasn't easy to get it like a good arch over the net. So there are a few issues with having a lot of weight. In this racket here you can see an example where this is a very light racket, the soft drives, but I've added so 2.5 grams, 2.5 grams and 2 grams up there. That's 7 extra grams of racket on the head. All that weight will start making the racket more and more head heavy. You always need, if you want to add weight to the head of the racket, make sure to counterbalance in some way in the handle to make sure you maintain the balance and some maneuverability of the racket. So there's tons of lead tape also underneath the base grip here. But this is an example of a situation where I've been adding way too much weight. For a while I used to add always 3, 9 and 12 on some rackets after trying them in stock form. But I've changed up my technique. I can hit now more cleanly with more topspin, using my feet a lot more, bending my knees, all that basic stuff that I could have worked on more without all this tweaking and customizing the frame. So be a bit careful with putting too much weight. Start low, 2 grams at 12, for example, bump up the swing weight a bit, see how that feels. Don't go overboard because that racket might be unplayable or very difficult to control because all the weight adds swing weight and then adds power to the frame. So it becomes kind of an uncontrollable racket at some point or very difficult to maneuver. So these are 8 typical mistakes I see when I'm around tennis clubs, when I talk to players, when I consult players on what rackets they should use. What mistakes do you see? Anything else than this? Please add them in the comments below and I'll check through that. There will be more videos like that. If you disagree, please also put them in the comments and we have a discussion about that. But these are typical things that I see and I've done myself. I'm no better. And that's actually how I learned how to use the racket and the strings to your advantage. And I think that's very important. It's all possible. You just need to figure out a few things and work on your footwork technique. Get a good racket for your level. That's my advice. Because there's so many rackets out there, I'm sure there's something for you that works well where you are now and can bring you to a new level together with your work on the tennis court. Well, that's all for this video. I hope you found it enjoyable, useful, informative, and more videos like this to come if you click like and show me the love. I really appreciate all that. Please subscribe to the channel. I know only a third of you are subscribed, so I would really love some more subscribers. I really appreciate every one of you, and if you want to send more support to Tennis Nerd besides subscribing, you can buy something from the links in the description below. Those are my affiliates: Tennis Warehouse Europe, and Tennis Only for tennis gear, and a few other interesting brands and products that you can subscribe to. I get a small commission at no cost to you, so big thanks. Also, I have a Patreon page where I publish content every week that's a little bit different from this. Sneak peeks, personal vlogs, all kinds of stuff. So please join there. It's only $2 on the lowest tier, and you get more and more content, and you also support Tennis Nerd a little bit so I can keep doing what I love, which is talk about tennis and play tennis. That's all for this one. Have a nice day, and don't forget to play some tennis.